Hi there, listener. We, the editorial team of a manufacturer, have the great privilege of bringing you interviews from some of the best manufacturers, leaders, industry analysts, young pioneers, innovators, and solution providers. But sadly, we can't possibly fit all of them into our podcast episodes. Fear not, though, because you're listening to Archives, a platform where you can hear these fascinating and thought-provoking interviews in full. This is another interview taken from the show floor of Smart Factory Expo in 2022. Sumeet Ladsaongikar, partner at Kearney, London, was a keynote speaker at Manufacturing Leaders Summit that same year. Here he is talking about the value chain trilemma of financial, resilience and sustainability performance with the manufacturer editor Joe Bush.
Hi, welcome to the Manufacturer Studio here at Smart Factory Expo. I'm Joe Bush, I head up the editorial team at the Manufacturer, and I'm here with Sumeet Ladsaongikar.
That's correct.
Thank you. From Kearney. We're here to talk about the value chain trilemma. Sumeet, you kindly wrote an article for a recent issue of the magazine, and your keynote at MLS is going to be around the same topic. So, to everybody out there, can you explain what the value chain trilemma is?
Sure. So very happy to be here and talking to you. The value chain trilemma is essentially a balancing act at the end of the day. It's a balancing act across three dimensions: financial performance, resilience, and sustainability performance. And especially with all the crises that have happened over the past 3 years, right? Say COVID, the supply shortages, the labor shortages, talent shortages, the pressure that we have on ESG and improvement. This has become even more relevant, because every COO or operations leader or manufacturing leader is grappling with these three dimensions, and how do you make decisions both short-term and long-term. So what the value chain trilemma tries to do is capture that those sorts of trade-offs that people need to do and see what is potentially a way forward. Okay.
So up until now, traditionally, how have manufacturers managed those trade-offs? How have they been sort of weighing up the three, as it were?
Sure. So what we actually did was to investigate exactly this question. We looked at a selection of 355 companies, totaling almost 11 trillion in market capitalization in 2021 across 5 industry sectors, to just see how people are doing, right? Where is it that there is progress? Where is it that progress still needs to happen? And what comes through is very clear. It seems to be a very difficult journey for companies to go through, but there is clearly progress that is being made. And when I sort of elaborate that, what's happened is most companies have taken a fairly reactive approach to this. And that's sort of understandable, because you've had all these crises, and therefore you just respond to the next supply shortage that comes through, or the next labor shortage that comes through. Whereas very few companies have taken a proactive approach, where you look at all of these dimensions and look at them end to end, and then initiate programs to tackle those.
Okay. So traditionally, why have industrial value chains been so difficult to manage, and perhaps more importantly, how have they been exacerbated by the recent challenges that the sector's faced?
Sure. So when you look at industrial value chains, and you sort of specifically focus on the industrial OEMs, these tend to be makers of capital equipment, right? So the manufacturers of transformers, motors, switch gear, your kit in your factory. So this is classically what is treated as capex by a lot of manufacturers, and they sit and they are driven a lot by economic cycles. So what happens is they tend to have long lead times, right? They tend to have a mix of value chains. So they tend to have a combination of make to stock, make to order, engineer to order, configure to order. It's a whole range of supply chains within an organization that has to be managed, with long lead times and a combination of product and project-based businesses. So managing that complexity is what makes this particularly difficult for industrial value chains. Other industries also have their own set of challenges, so pharma, consumer goods, and so on and so forth, and the concept is very applicable for them. But for industrial OEMs, which is where also the article focuses on, because of this sort of complexity, it becomes even more of a challenge.
Sure. So, manufacturers may, going back to the three elements of the value chain, manufacturers may be focusing on one or perhaps two of those elements, but how do they drive performance simultaneously across the three?
If there's one thing you take away is the need for an end-to-end approach, right? To be able to drive this simultaneous performance. And what do I mean by end-to-end approach? End-to-end is not just looking at manufacturing as in production or site improvement, or looking at sales force effectiveness, or looking at R&D and product development improvement, right? Or looking at S&OP improvement. It's about looking at all of these together, right? And the reason for that is a lot of value ends up sitting at the interface of functions, right? Classic example is we worked with an industrial OEM wherein we were able to sort of reduce the complexity in their product portfolio, move them to a platform-based concept which the automotive industry has. Now that, of course, drives a reduction in product complexity, but it also unlocks significant savings in the supply chain because you are now going to market with fewer components, fewer parts, right? Your product development cycle increases and you're able to bring products to market faster. So it's essentially one function, R&D, driving value across other functions in the organization. And therefore this sort of end-to-end approach is really important. And if you need to resolve this sort of this trilemma, having that end-to-end approach is key.
And absolutely, we talk to a lot of manufacturers, and often they explain their headaches, and a lot of them are around those siloed elements of their business. So, how important is that end-to-end approach in terms of rectifying that?
The end-to-end approach is really critical. So I talked about an example where product development could sort of unlock value in the value chain. Another example, right, from an industrials player, which sort of just shows how the trilemma can be resolved, is we worked in the early 2000s with a large electrical equipment OEM, and each of the different functions, so order-bound engineering, manufacturing, operational purchasing, had their own individual lead time buffers, right? So if you want to make a big transformer, for example, you have the engineering folks taking 2 weeks to do something, but then having a 1 week buffer just in case something went wrong. Manufacturing saying that we will do this in 8 weeks, but then having a 2 week buffer just in case something went wrong. When you put all of this together and look at it as an organization, you say you don't need all of those individual buffers. What really matters is whether we are able to deliver a good product on time, right? And that end-to-end approach, linking up these different functions, taking out those individual functional buffers is what really drove value. And in that context, it of course drove better financial performance because you sort of are able to sell a lot more to the market, get more out of your factory, but then also drove agility because you were offering shorter lead times to your customers and you could respond to changes in design or changes in the requirements from the customer. So it's sort of financial and resilience at the same time, right? Just by challenging individual functional silos, as you mentioned.
Indeed. And in your article, you alluded to a number of levers that can be used to help manufacturers with the value chain trilemma. And although there's no one silver bullet solution, can you perhaps explain some of those levers and
Sure.
how they add value for manufacturers?
Sure. So we talk about 14 different levers across 3 parts of the end-to-end value chain. So if you look at the first bit, which is the front end, which is essentially how do you face up to customers, right? There is a key lever in terms of having a segmented customer offer and an aligned supply model. What do I mean by that? You don't offer your entire portfolio at the same lead time, for example, right? You offer certain high runners at much shorter lead times. What that then means is you are able to do an assemble to order or a make to stock type of value chain for that. Whereas some of the more bespoke products that a certain customer might require will require engineering in the first place, right? So it's a different lead time versus what I mentioned in the beginning. And it's a different value chain because it's an engineer to order value chain where you're going to have engineering do some work, then you're going to order materials which are bespoke to a particular customer order, and then you're going to, of course, manufacture it, and it might take longer because the cycle times are varying, right? So having that sort of segmented customer offer and aligning it to the supply model is one key lever on the front end. Across the manufacturing and supply chain, if you look at the supply base, right, I think a big thing that a lot of companies need to think about is not just looking at their external spend, but looking at also things like the scope 3 emissions, right, of their external supply base. And at Kearney, we do something called as a carbon cube these days, which is not just looking at supply base and their spend, but also looking at what their scope 3 emissions could be, and then making a holistic decision on supplier choices, right? So one example from the second bit, which is manufacturing and supply chain. And finally, enablers. So things like product platforming and defining product platforms, right? And not building each product bespoke. But at the same time, not just designing it that way, but also including what we call as a life cycle impact assessment, right? So if you are, for example, going to build a furnace, then the outer shell for it, where does the cast steel come from, right? Is it coming in from Asia, and therefore what is the emissions impact of that versus what's the trade-off if you buy green steel from Sweden, for example, right? So making that sort of holistic decision, looking at both emissions as well as spend together, and putting the facts on the table is what you can do to resolve the trilemma.
Yeah, sure. And you've alluded to some earlier, but can you cite any sort of case examples of the work that Kearney's done with some manufacturers to sort of, some real world examples?
Sure. So 3 case examples are there. I'll quickly touch upon all 3. One was with a specialty chemicals company, especially looking at the environmental performance and financial performance at the same time. What we instituted there was a metric or a composite metric called as eco-efficiency, which was essentially a composite of energy, emissions, and waste performance. And every manufacturing site improvement we did for the client looked at eco-efficiency and financial performance together. And any business case that was built was a holistic business case, as opposed to just saying we could reduce a little bit of cost here and there, right? What that then resulted is over an 8-year period, almost a 30% reduction in specific energy consumption and emissions, and a 40% improvement in EBIT, right? So that sort of culture of looking at things holistically drives a big impact. And then there are similar examples in industrial OEMs as well as in the automotive tier 2 value space, value chains that we worked on, where we sort of look at 2 or all 3 dimensions simultaneously.
Sure. And we're always very timely here at Smart Factory Expo. Last year it was coincided with COP26. This time tomorrow we'll be on the verge of another budget. What do you think might be coming down the pipe for UK manufacturers? What are your expectations from tomorrow's announcement?
So I think the key thing to plan for is uncertainty is a given. I think over the next year or so, maybe even a couple of years, I think there are inflation headwinds which are there right now. We will probably see a drop in demand, in customer demand, but order books for a lot of manufacturers are still full. So how do you sort of manage inflation and full order books, but then clearly an indication of falling demand coming through? And governmental intervention might or might not help every sector, to the right level. So I think there is uncertainty on the horizon. However, having this sort of holistic view, thinking both short and long term, is critical, I think, to sort of facing up to it.
Yeah, fantastic. And just finally, Sumeet, obviously we're only a couple of hours into Smart Factory Expo, so what are you looking to get out of the event? Is there anything particularly that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, so I think from the expo, I always come here every year. I think a combination of both the established vendors as well as some of the startups. I think that combination is really nice for me. Opens my mind up in terms of what's going on in the world of digital manufacturing and also the wider manufacturing technology space. But then I'm also looking forward to connecting with a lot of industry peers and friends. So I think it's just a fantastic event to be here.
Fantastic. Sumeet, thank you for your time and enjoy the show.
We hope you enjoyed that, listener. Keep an ear out for more episodes like this one, and of course for more episodes of the Manufacturer Podcast. Whatever streaming site you're listening on, be it Spotify or Apple Music, be sure to give this podcast a follow and a rating. And if you're watching this on YouTube, why not subscribe to our channel for the latest video content?